How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the February edition of Eureka Whiskey Club. Welcome to the virtual tasting for February. I hope everyone's having a great month. Hopefully you had a great Valentine's Day. And if you don't celebrate Valentine's Day, then I hope you had, good February 14th and we're able to drink some great whiskey. But tonight we are proud and honored to be joined by two gentlemen from Doc Swinson's. To talk about their amazing whiskey and to talk about our pick this month, which is the single barrel bourbon. We had 6 different barrels that we selected. I have all samples of 6 today, so I'll try my best to go through them all. But anyways, we have a couple great prizes to give away as well, and I'll just talk about those prizes really quick, and then I'll let two fine gentlemen introduce themselves. So as always, we'll have a Q&A section at the end. Top 2 questions tonight. First place winner is going to get a port finish bourbon from Doc Swinson's. This was actually Fred Minnick named it number 14 on his top 100 of 2022. So super rad bottle to get. And then the second place winner is going to get a cool hat, a t-shirt, and a Glencairn glass. So obviously 2 great prizes to give away tonight. So make sure you ask your questions. And as always, put your name before your question if you're using an account not associated with your Whiskey Club account. But anyways, that is business as usual. And Dennis, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do at Doc Swinson's. And then Jesse, I'll let you follow.
Sure. So, hi guys. My name is Dennis. I'm the spirit specialist at Doc Swinson's. Essentially, that's a fancy term for sales. So my primary role is to go into accounts, educate on our products, our process, how we make our whiskey, why our whiskey is worth drinking. My background is bars and restaurants. I ran whiskey bars and restaurants for about 10 years. So I grew to have a deep appreciation for whiskey and all the various elements that make a good whiskey. And that's one of the reasons I end up working at Doc Swinson, is bringing all of that whiskey knowledge, and especially working with restaurants like Eureka and other restaurants to really just bring those whiskeys into the market and show people how you can have a great whiskey on its own or in cocktails as well. So that's a little bit about my background and what I do here.
Cool.
I'm Jesse Parker. I'm the guy that actually makes it. Let me start here. I'm 31, and I started doing this before I was of legal drinking age, but just at home for fun.
Don't worry.
What's that?
Take that out in post. Oh no, we're live. Never mind. Sorry. Go ahead, Jesse.
Oh, we are live. Oops, cut that out. No, I'm just kidding. No. My parents had an appreciation for spirits and wine and stuff like that as a kid, so they let me try a lot of it, and I became totally fascinated and virtually obsessed with processing methods, flavor profiles, everything that has to do with this industry, really. And the first opportunity I got when I turned 21, I put my foot right in a door at some craft distilleries and learned a lot about processing brandies, whiskeys, gins, vodkas. And it just has been growing ever since. So here we are almost 12 years later, where we've got Doc Swinson's starting to become nationally recognized brand, which is really exciting. I never thought I would have been here in the first place. And with a focus on something that also was nearly non-existent 10 years ago, and that was finishing American whiskeys. So I'm excited to be here and taste of these single barrels is all with you.
Awesome. And I think that's a good segue into kind of my next question. You both touched on a little bit, but Dennis, what led you to the spirits industry? What specifically whiskey? I know you said you had a background in bars and restaurants. Like what ignited the fire to start drinking and selling whiskey?
I mean, I think for me, for myself personally, I just had a natural progression through spirits. I didn't have, um, I didn't have those fun high school drinking years like many people do. I actually started drinking later in life. I didn't actually start really drinking until I was, 24 years old. Um, and when I first started tasting spirits, it was in the context of classic cocktails. And I just kind of really fell in love with the concept of mixing up these classic cocktails and working with these different spirits and how those flavors combined to make something really cool. But all of these elements could also stand on their own as good products. And so that's kind of how I got into spirits. And from there, I think I just had a natural progression of where my palate found enjoyment in terms of spirits. Earlier on, I was really big into gin and rums, which I still love. But then once I got to the whiskey, it took me a little bit longer to get really into whiskey. But once I kind of got into whiskey, it was just this kind of like deep dive into all of these global styles of whiskey, Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey. And then when you hit American whiskey, and at the time when I got into it, that was like the very beginning of this kind of whiskey renaissance, so to speak, in both classic cocktail world and just with people drinking whiskey. It was primarily viewed as like, your grandpa's drink, and everyone drank Jack Daniels or Jim Beam or Wild Turkey, and in terms of rye whiskeys, I mean, there was probably 4 rye whiskeys on the market in Washington State at the time. And that was it. That was all you could find. And so just as that market grew, I think it was just really interesting to me, just watching it grow organically. And then kind of doing the hunt thing, looking for these bottles that I'd heard about that back then you could still find all of them because they were all dirt cheap and hiding on shelves somewhere.
You could find a bottle of Blanton's for,
Yeah, I mean, I used to buy Elmer T. Lee by the case for $16 a bottle back in the day, and no one thought it was anything special back then. So just kind of experiencing all those different flavor profiles, the bourbons, the ryes, the different mash bills. Just to me, it's really interesting the way grain and wood react together to create something that's pretty unique to the to American whiskey in particular, because of the use of first fill barrels. I think wood has a much greater influence on American whiskey than it does probably any other spirit. So that's just kind of how I grew to enjoy it. And then in regards to Doc Swinson's, I've known all these guys for a long time. And so it just kind of was a natural progression for me as I got older and didn't really want to close down bars at 2 a.m. every day, to move into a more respectable hour side of the business. So for me, it was just a natural progression, moving from the bar side into the whiskey side.
Dennis, it's funny. Now that I think about it, I think when I first met you, you were running a little bar. And what was it, the Oyster Bar?
The Oyster Bar, yeah.
Yeah. I had like 5 tops in there or something like that. And I was peddling gin and apple brandy out of a box to your clients.
I think it was the Honeycrisp vodka at the time.
It was Honeycrisp vodka. That was totally it.
So Dennis kicked you out of his bar, is what you're saying.
What's that?
Dennis kicked you out of his bar for trying to sell bootleg spirits. So
Hey, I think we had something set up. I don't remember. That and apple cider we mixed with gin. That was me, not Dennis. Dennis was much classier then.
Yes, you started in making cider, and then tell us a little bit about your background, other than your parents letting you get drunk when you were a kid.
Getting drunk. Well, my dad was really into rum and gin, as that's what I really remember him drinking more than almost anything else. A little bit of whiskey here and there, but mostly just rum and gin. So I naturally followed suit and also started enjoying rum and gin, and particularly because nobody would take my bottle at high school parties of gin because nobody drank gin. So that's probably where my infatuation with gin originally came from. But when I became the age of drinking, I thought it would be fun to learn something about what became my biggest passion and hobby, something I enjoyed more than what I was studying in college. And that was distillation, and particularly history and processing methods as well. And so what I did was this was 2011, just about 2012, which was basically the beginning of the craft distillery movement in the United States. There was only a few before that even opened. And I thought I'd apply to one, and actually applied to 3 different craft distilleries that were near my university. And these were some of the first ones even in Washington State. And I eventually got hired by one, and it was quite an interesting experience because it was an apple orchard with one of the strangest people that own it in the world I've ever met, which Dennis can contest to, I'm sure. Anyways, they took a chance. What's that?
Is the distillery still around?
Absolutely. It's not even far from this location where we blend our whiskeys either. Owned by new people. Unfortunately, the person that hired me actually has passed away. So anyways, on a much happier note though, they took a total risk on what was a 21-year-old kid. They gave him the keys to a distillery and said, figure out how to make this stuff because we aren't distillers, let alone cider makers. They primarily grew table apples, a really interesting array of different table apples, that's for sure. And probably some of the best thing you could do with them is make them into vodka and in turn make them into gin because they weren't incredibly aromatic or flavorful because of the fact that they were table apples and not traditional cider apples.
Were they making cider out of table apples? I've never...
I mean, most cider in this country is made out of table apples, unless you get to the nitty gritty good guys. Most of it's just bought out of a juice place, Eastern Washington or somewhere in upstate New York, and flavored. I mean, so that's my opinion on American ciders. So there's a few really good ones out there, but most of them, I don't know. We're just not there. We don't have the varietals in this country really anymore. At least not grown on any kind of commercial level.
Like a Spanish cider.
Say that? Sorry, I'm only getting part of it.
This isn't cider talk. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, but I said opposed to like a good Spanish cider.
Yeah, or anything from Normandy, I mean, where Calvados is from. We're all spirits people on this. If you've ever had good Calvados, you got to have good cider apples to make it, or pears. Most of it has a good blend of pear in it anyways, which is something we used to do at the distillery as well, as we grew pears. So every once in a while, I would get my hands on some great pears. Bartlett's in particular, or Williams Christ is what they're called in Europe. That makes a really aromatic and flavorful brandy as well.
Have you guys done any apple brandy finished whiskey?
No. Working on it. Okay. Working on it. It's really hard to get really high quality apple brandy barrels. So Calvados barrels, you really have to get them from Normandy, Calvados region, and that is not always easy because most of the time those barrels are used for generations, and they don't always make it across the ocean well or in good conditions. And although we've saved a lot of barrels here, we're not exactly Coopers either.
Got it.
One day, that is something I'd love to do. A nice rye whiskey, probably finished in some, old Calvados casks. But anyway, so we were distilling all these apples, and I really loved gin through college. That was my thing, like I said earlier, for a lot of reasons. Not just because somebody wouldn't just take the bottle at a party or something like that, but because I actually really enjoyed the bouquet, the flavors. It was something that was alchemical. It was crazy. It was out there. And I started distilling gin based from these apples and using several different botanical ingredients. And we came up with a pretty good recipe. It actually is my claim to fame when I was 21 in the spirits industry. We won the Beverage Tasting Institute's international competition. Out of every single gin submitted that year, which was quite a lot, including all the major big brands that you probably knew or still know. And we actually kicked all their butts. So that was kind of a cool thing. And then from there on out, I started getting a little bit more interested in traveling again, and I wanted to learn how to actually perfect what I was working on. And I couldn't do that in a craft distillery. So I actually almost left the industry entirely to go figure out something completely different. And then some of the investors of Doc Swinson's offered me a position here, and we built what is called Distiller's Way, and Doc Swinson's is one of the brands underneath it. So
yeah, tell me more about Distiller's Way.
Yeah, so we originally set up our company back in 2015. At least I think that's when we were incorporated. And it was specifically to build profiles and products and brands for other people. So private label contracting, essentially, or white label. And well, that's really difficult to get into unless you have a massive operation.
So you were making the distillate, and then you were trying to sell it and contract it out to other people.
We actually sourced it.
Okay.
So just like Doc Swinson's is a source whiskey that we manipulate, it's the same thing. I basically traveled around, figured out all these different contacts all over the world to bring in, rums, vodkas, gins, you name it, and tweak them based upon our clients' requirements or tastes, and then offer full production of that, so it just shows up their door done. So that's really what our company was built for in the first place. And then what we started doing is getting into whiskeys very slowly. We would just buy up some barrels here and there and release them just mostly in our local Washington market. And that was back kind of like what Dennis is saying. You used to be able to, get Blanton's for pretty cheap. What was the other one you said?
Elmer T.
Elmer T. Stuff you can't really even find very often anymore. We used to be able to call up distilleries that made all these whiskeys and basically ask, hey, what years do you have? And I'd get a whole list and opportunity to buy whatever at a pretty reasonable price. Well, that was, like I said, that was about 8 years ago or so, and that's not the case anymore. But
yeah, listen, I feel you. We started this club shortly after the pandemic. I think it was like May or June of 2020. Even before then, I've been buying barrels for Eureka since, as a company, we've been buying barrels since 2011, but I've been buying barrels for the company since 2014. And it's so easy we buy pretty much whatever we wanted back in that. And then even at the beginning, when we started this club in 2020, it was a lot easier to source barrels. And I think COVID got a lot of people drinking, and a lot of people discovered whiskey and joined clubs. And anyways, I agree. It's much harder to find and source things these days than it used to be.
That's incredibly difficult. Like you were saying, even you used to.
Thank you for selling us your amazing whiskey barrels. I appreciate it.
Hey, we can't drink it all, so it's got to go somewhere. So thanks for being a part of it and trusting in us. Yeah. But yeah, no, it used to be really easy to be able to find barrels. There also wasn't very many whiskeys on the shelf either, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Doc Swinson's really got its debut back technically just before the pandemic, but really that first few months of 2020 when we released our 15-year bourbon. And we released a couple different batches of that kind of went and kind of blew up in the Reddit community because we didn't have any money for marketing. This was not really a brand we were originally focusing on. It was just a hobby that the few of us in the office here really liked working with whiskeys. So we started finishing some, working on single barrels, and those were all 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old bourbons for $50 for a lot of it. A bottle is what we sold it for. Until we released that 15-year Kentucky, and of course that was a little more expensive. But we were one of the only people on the block that had that kind of juice, and so naturally everybody in Reddit started picking it up and finding it. And there we go. We had to back it with something. And so all the previous years that I've been working on blending some small batch whiskeys, and I'm talking really small stuff, a couple barrels here, a couple barrels there, or finishing just a couple barrels here and a couple barrels there. That's what eventually went into what is now Doc Swinson's entire line. The whole ethos around the brand, everything. So it's just been growing ever since then. And no, we don't have more 15-year bourbon sitting around. So don't even ask the question.
I'm getting a behind the scenes update here. Apparently we have someone else that wants to join the call. I think his name is Steve Main.
Oh,
That guy.
Do our best prices, right? Your name, come on down.
What's up, gentlemen? How you doing?
what's the
No,
password?
you're just crashing the call, huh? I just get these text messages saying Steve wants to join the call.
Hey, I apologize. I was running late, and I'm gonna have to jump early too. But wanted to come in and say hi and thank you guys for the support, and hope you guys are enjoying those bottles. Or if you haven't yet, you're about to.
Well, real quick, Steve, tell us who you are, what you do, and what led you to Doc Swinson's.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Steve. Dennis and I work closely together. I'm sure Dennis, you got to give him your spiel. But yeah, we run the sales and distribution for Docs. We're out there in market working with distributors and retailers and guys like Trevor here to try to get the bottles out there. Not just of the core lineup that Jesse has, but also unique ways like single barrels and different offerings like that. So yeah, Dennis and I are the ones in market, and it's a blast. I think I caught a little bit of what Jesse was saying, where we started to where we are today. It has certainly evolved quite a lot. It's been a hell of a ride, and it's not close to over yet. So no, it's been good growing this thing from its, small beginnings of really just, getting product into stores like Total Wine locally. And then kind of once we got the name out there with that 15-year juice, really starting to build the distribution network and making sure, when you guys walk into a store or a restaurant, you can find a bottle or two.
Cool. Well, happy to have you here.
Thanks, man. Thanks. Appreciate, reaching out to even look at the barrels that we offer and, pulling the trigger on a few of them and getting some bottles out to the team. So thank you for, really making sure that all comes through, and we're excited to be here.
Yeah. Thanks to the whiskey community. I heard about you guys through, I can't even remember, just recommended to me by, I think, one of our members told me to check you guys out. And Steve sent me some samples, and I said, yeah, let's do this thing. So really great stuff. So where are you guys, and if you're not at liberty to say, please let me know, but like where are you sourcing the majority of your whiskey from? Is it MGP stuff? Is it
Yeah, like 98% or so is MGP. So everything that you're tasting here
like for you as far as selecting, barrels from them.
Yeah, so a lot of times, kind of like I was saying in the past, you just would call them up and they would just have like thousands and thousands of barrels to choose from. So they could give you a whole breakdown from if they're palletized or racked, the mash bills, the fill dates, where the barrels came from, so specific cooperage, and what rick houses they existed in. And sometimes we're allowed to be picky and sometimes we're not. But the good thing is once we buy them, we could choose to leave them in Indiana in the rick houses or bring them here to our warehouse in the PNW here. We're just south of Vancouver, Canada, along I-5, so on the west side. So it's very similar to like maritime France or parts of southern Scotland as far as the weather goes. So totally different aging that we would find on our whiskeys in Indiana. I guess to further answer your question, MGP has been a wonderful partner to work with. They make incredibly great whiskeys. They have such a variety of different mash bills that all add to the final blends really well. One of them is going to give you more body and weight and fruit, and the other one's going to give you more spice. It's going to be lighter. It's going to be more synonymous with like Kentucky style bourbon, for example. Or it's going to be brighter. So being able to pair all these different mash bills together and working with one distillery that is well known for making great bourbons and ryes has been actually really quite nice.
Yeah, and I think to elaborate that on a little bit more, when we first started, it was what's on the market, what can we get, and then as the brand grew, it was okay, how do we make some consistency in the everyday products. Jesse was tasked with coming up with really, really fun finishing style, blending styles. And, from that came finding a consistent source of juice, which MGP has. We always got the ear to the ground on what's out there. And if something pops up and we can get it out there for a decent price, we want to bring something like that in if Jesse can play with it. But as far as MGP goes, when we get, when Jesse gets, a truck full of barrels, one of the cool things that the way the brand's been kind of built is Jesse gets to go in there and, taste and get proofs and really be hands-on with those barrels and decide, all right, do we hold on to it for a little bit longer, in our climate, which is, very Scottish-like, which Jesse touched on. Does it go into the everyday lineup? Does it go into the exploratory cask, or does it go into single barrels? So we kind of Jesse really gets to be hands-on with it and deciding where those all go. So it's not just like, oh man, we're stuck with this barrel. It's like, oh, here's something so weird and funky that might work with this barrel. What was that?
It's like, is there a panel, or is it just up to Jesse?
Dude, my liver is being tortured. No. I mean, I think we all put input on the products, and please, Dennis and Steve, feel free to chime in at any point in time. But for the most part, what we do is when we get barrels, let's say we already have thousands of them sitting in a warehouse in the Midwest. When we decide to bring them here to Washington is when we really start going through them with a fine-tooth comb. Steve's not wrong. Every time we get a truck in, we take a whole bunch of data points on every single individual barrel, from how much, how much it weighs. So we understand how much whiskey's in it. So we understand how much evaporation has happened at what proofs. We also pull a sample so we could taste it. And then essentially it goes into a couple different categories, just as Steve already mentioned. And of course, some of the task is what I really do is basically being a chef. I've got these sets of ingredients. What can I make the best out of these ingredients? And that's really what I'm shooting for. So none of our products have the exact same process behind them per se. Exploratory casks is all over the place. I change up how I process the first barrels or make my specific blend profiles for different finish casks, as well as triple cask, which is our straight bourbon whiskey finished in 2 different types of sherry, as well as cognac casks, is produced completely differently from our Solera method rye whiskey, which is finished in rum casks. So we're not just taking whiskeys, dumping them in giant vats, and we are to some degree, but we're being decisive and intentional about what your profile is.
Yeah.
And then we're distributing it how it needs to be. Sorry?
How many mash bills are you guys working with through MGP?
So I work with 4 different mash bills through MGP. I'm a really big fan of rye, like a lot. So we tend to do everything here with their 2 high rye bourbons. So they're 36%, they're 21%, as well as we do 2 different ryes. They're 51, so they're super low rye whiskey, and then their standard 95, which everybody's probably pretty familiar with or have ever tried if you've ever had a rye whiskey.
So what's the mash bill of the single barrel bourbon we're drinking now? Is it the 36 or 21?
Which these are all 21s? Okay.
Yeah.
Which barrel are you drinking, by the way?
I'm drinking my big bottle. That is barrel 0308 are the last 4. I think they all have the same.
Cool. Yeah, they have all the 22.
Yeah, 0308.
That's what I have as well.
That's just I actually pick up my box just like everyone else does. I go to the restaurant. So I get I pick up from the Cerritos location. And so I get what all the Cerritos people get. But I also, I have all the other smaller bottles too. So let's get into tasting the whiskey then. Then I have a couple more questions. Steve, I know Steve called me earlier and he's like, what should I know before the call? And then I was like, oh, nothing. Don't worry. Everything's fine. And then I have a question.
Now you have a question.
But Steve, Steve may have to jump off before then. So we'll see what happens. But.
Now I'm intrigued.
So, tell us. So we know this is an MGP mash bill, 21% rye. What's the other breakdown of the mash bill? Is it everything else is corn? Is there any malted barley? What are we doing here?
Yeah, all of MGP's mash bills have some level of malted barley in them because you need that for the saccharification of the grains, so the enzyme to break down all the other grains in order to get the short chain sugars so the yeast can ferment it. So there's 4% malted barley in this, and the remainder is corn.
75%. I'm good at math.
You are. It's funny when we're talking MGP, nobody calls it bourbon. They just call it 36 rye, 21 rye. That's it. Nobody calls that, even though it is bourbon, it's not. It's just, so we don't even call it bourbon internally, right? It's kind of funny. So sometimes it like messes me up because I'm like, oh yeah, it's the 36, the 36 rye. Because that's how I talk with my person at MGP.
So do you guys have any of the barrels, or not expecting you to, but sip it on tonight?
I actually have the one that you're sipping on currently.
Oh, cool. You want to walk us through, what you picked up on this one?
Actually, would you do it? And I'll follow up.
I
always think it's funny to tell people what I think about.
Yes, I will do it. But I'm not. My nose is not the best tonight. I will say that.
Fair enough. I mean, I'm happy to too. I just always find it interesting because everybody always asks me, and I'm like, the reality is, you got a glass too. I'm curious what you think about the whiskey you chose. I mean, I chose to make sure it was good enough to go into this category. But...
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm definitely getting like some fresh baked cornbread on the nose. Typical bourbon notes, caramel toffee.
Yep.
I get like a very nice minerality, like almost like wet stone. That corn sweetness really pops. I get a little bit of baking spices, but not overwhelming. And that rye actually comes through towards the tail end, which I get a small amount of dill on.
Yeah.
Again, that same typical bourbon notes, vanilla, caramel, toffee, all there. And then I get it finishes with like a little bit of I can't put my finger on that.
Is another spice like a darker, heavier one, or a fruit?
No, it's almost like I don't want to say cornbread again, but it's definitely like I mean, it's pretty cornbready, to be quite honest with you. But
yeah, I thought this one I only have 4 samples here for the record. But this of the 4 I thought was actually the sweetest and the most corn forward, along with I think 138, if anybody has that one.
Yeah, let me. If you chat, like, let us know what barrel you're tasting. Let us know what.
Yeah, really quick. I just want to tie in a couple things. Somebody had asked earlier about how do we approach or develop a palate to distinguish different whiskeys, and then to go back to Jesse, not necessarily going right into that bottle, but asking you for your opinions, just to kind of tie that together. I know that's a big thing for us. Is like. So many people are like, oh, my palate, I don't know. It's not as strong. Like, how do I get it strong? It's like, share what you're tasting. Just talk about it. Whatever you're tasting, you're not going to be wrong. If you taste something and it reminds you of something, you share it. And, just the more that you do that, the more that you're talking with people, the more you have something, the same thing in that glass, and the more back and forth you do, and not be shy about it, just let it out. That's what I've always seen is how I've got my palate better is sitting down with Dennis and Jesse and, the guys in the office. And all right, what are we tasting? And not being afraid to kind of throw out that first idea.
Yeah. So I just poured, I went for the big boy. I went with the highest proof of all of them, which is the 122.4. And that kind of wet stone, like musky wood is much more prevalent on the nose with this one than it was with the other. Like,
is that barrel 138?
No, 126.
I don't have that one.
So let's see.
I probably drank all that.
I think so. There was 2 missing on the shelf there, and I was like, oh. But thank you for still setting me up here.
I will take credit for drinking that sample.
It must have been a really good one.
It was.
So you're saying it has more of the so you said wet stone, more wood.
Yeah, like there's definitely it on the nose initially, and even on the palate, it's not quite as as sweet as the last one. You know, I get a lot more wood characteristic. I almost get like a little bit of anise.
Yeah, I often get a little anise out of most of MGP's products, to be fair. But that's just what my palate is really sensitive to, is typically anise, as well as some other unpleasant things. I'm pretty good at picking out not good whiskey.
And what for example are some notes that you're averse to?
Yeah, rubber and sulfur.
Okay.
And in small quantities can be used really beautifully in blends, humorously enough. And you may never hear that from anybody ever, but and we don't come across it almost ever here. Not with these kind of products. But I do find them in, for example, finishing casks a lot, because we do a lot of, our primary focus is finished whiskeys. And we do pull them out and finish casks from time to time. So when I'm getting new casks in, they all get checked, and we stuff my nose in them. If there's any liquid, we pull that out and give it a taste. And that pops off like no tomorrow for me. Really sensitive to that. One that I'm not as sensitive to is mint. Everybody always says there's mint in these, and mint doesn't pop for me very, very much. But I think that's because I love mint, and growing up we had tons of mint, so a lot of it does not bother me at all.
We did have a couple comments. I had Sarah Steepleton said she has barrel 343, which I have here, and that was buttery caramel. So
it's actually really funny that you say buttery caramel too. I also age
get the butteriness on the nose. Go ahead, Jesse.
I also age a bunch of rums here, and some of our white rum goes into a fair amount of these ex-bourbon casks, very ones that probably your whiskey came out of, and they're incredibly buttery and caramely, absolutely insanely buttery, which is pretty neat. And we definitely find that in our Doc's bourbons a lot. Because it's certainly not the rum, let me tell you that. So as far as like a blend,
these barrels were finished in rum casks. Is that what you're saying?
Say that again.
Maybe I misunderstand what you're saying. These whiskeys were finished in rum, or
no? I used the barrels that these whiskeys came from to age rum.
Got it.
Yeah, we do a lot of things here. So whiskey's just our primary focus, but rum's a subcategory. Lots of things.
Give me a good bottle of Foursquare or Hampton, and I'm a happy man.
Hampton's one of my favorites.
I love Hampton. The funkier, the better. Higher here's the better. Sorry, I love rum too. So, anyways,
I find that to be really common with whiskey groups. I feel like rum's the next natural thing. If you're into bourbons, it's probably rum is the thing that you don't talk about, but it's there, and you talk about with a certain group of people.
Yeah, there's sorry, I'm excited about rum. If you're close to Vancouver, there's a tiki bar in Vancouver that I always wanted to go to called the Shameful Tiki Room.
I actually haven't been to that one.
It's great.
Epic. Great. Okay.
Yeah,
there's probably like a 40-minute drive from this seat. So
yeah.
No, that's perfect. That's easy. It's closer than Seattle. Exactly. It's like dinner time.
All right. Well, I'm not going to go through all the whiskeys, but hopefully whatever bottle you got, you're enjoying.
120. If y'all got whoever got that one, I don't know, that one has like a much more hefty cherry kind of flavor too. So if you have anything to compare against the 120, it's like really hefty cherry notes. And I still think that 308.
Again, we talk about it so often on these calls. It's like, that's why I love tasting with people, is because someone will say something and then I'll be drinking the whiskey and I won't really get that at all. And then somebody will say, oh, it tastes like cherry. And I'm like, oh, fuck, yeah. Excuse my language.
Going back to what Steve was saying, right? It's the same thing. It's like, so when I first met Steve, we joked about something, and I think it was about tasting and like being the power of suggestion. And I said something along the lines of, bananas, Steves. It's all bananas.
Bananas.
And even though whiskey has a lot of banana notes to it, and for a really good reason, it is definitely a chemical compound that's commonly found in whiskey. But the whole point was the power of suggestion really, gets people's minds moving. And whether it's because they just go along with the flow, or it's because they're actually like, oh yeah, I didn't quite make that connection. but now I do because you said it. I totally see where that's coming from. And I don't know. One of my influences as a kid, so my teenage years, was I spent a lot of time with my best friend and I would drive across the country. We'd go stay in Michigan, and his aunt. We'd stay with his aunts quite often, and she was a Grand Sommelier, actually, which there's not a whole ton of those in the world. And she had a lot of wine, and she was the one that originally told me, just say what you think it is, and then learn from the people around you. Because the reality is, if you never say it, you don't really learn it. And if you just pick up what everybody else is saying, the reality is you may never learn it. You're just regurgitating information because it's, synonymous with that type of wine, for example. And that's not really tasting at that rate.
No, I always love tasting in a group. That's my favorite. Genevieve Wood says she has barrel 120. She gets heavy walnut pecan. Tastes like our bottles. Tastes like almost like a caramel pecan cheesecake.
Oh, right on. That's the 120.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Yeah, it does have a kind of creamy
that cream. Yeah.
characteristic. Little cream soda. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to jump into official questions from the chat here, because we're about at our 40-minute mark. Oh, well, really quick. I'm sorry, Steve. So the question of the evening, which we're trying to put a whiskey Spotify playlist together, and we're not going to release it until we have a few months in the bank. And last month I forgot to give a heads up to the other distillery, and I think I gave you guys about a 10-minute heads up. So so sorry for the lack of notice. But if you were to describe, and I guess just say, if you can pick a song associated with the Doc Swinson single barrel bourbon, that would be great. But if it's just a song that maybe encapsulates Doc Swinson's in general, I think that's fine as well. So what song would you pick that represents either Doc Swinson's in general or more specifically the single barrel bourbon?
Oh, man.
I'm still racking my brain. I originally said Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball as a joke.
Yeah, I was trying to think of some crazy jazz where it's all over the place. Doesn't make any sense, but somehow it all comes together and it's phenomenal.
What was yours, Steve?
I was just thinking of jazz music where it's kind of chaos. It's chaotic.
Yeah,
but when
Thelonious Monk. Yeah.
Huh? What was that?
Thelonious Monk.
Thelonious Monk. That
something that's just crazy. I mean, then it all just comes together at the end.
Monk. I love it. Jesse, we got you down for Wrecking Ball from Miley Cyrus.
Oh gosh. I feel like I'm just stuck to it. That was my era.
Dennis, were you able to come up with something?
Whiskey Moon from Chris Stapleton.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm going to go with Hold Me from the Teskey Brothers, just because I feel like
beautiful.
holding me while
I'm just embarrassed.
Drinking this whiskey.
And anything from the Kitchen Dwellers. Those guys are awesome.
Okay.
Oh, shout out. There you go.
We'll go back and write all this down, and hopefully we'll come out with our playlist in a couple months once we get some more songs.
Do I have an opportunity to redeem myself?
Yeah, go ahead. We're still putting Miley Cyrus Wrecking Ball on the
No, you totally should. I feel like everybody would just be like, what? And then I feel like they'll enjoy that moment, especially when they're thinking about docs.
You're going to hear it come on, and then they're going to go run and grab the bottle and be like, gotta pour me some.
So it's actually perfect. Maybe I shouldn't change it. All right, by the end of this, I'll think of something different. But my brain originally went to either This Must Be the Place by the Talking Heads or Big Balls by AC/DC.
All right. Hey, it's a playlist. We can put as many songs as we want on it. So.
Yes.
I could have named all 6 if you wanted. So
this is the third reference to This Must Be the Place I've had today. So
Nice.
Randomly.
Sorry, laughing too hard here. All right, let's get into some questions from the audience.
Please.
Clark White asks, Jesse, in a prior interview, you mentioned if you were going to distill whiskey, you would rather do it in Kentucky or near there. Can you describe your dream distillery if you were to move from Washington?
All right, if I was to move from Washington, I'd probably do it in Kentucky because that's where everybody has the idea that bourbon comes from. So it makes marketing a little easier, I will say. Plus, it's got a great climate for it, and it's more central for distribution. So I know my sales guys would love that.
I do have a 2-hour drive to a red eye.
Kentucky's a beautiful place. I just don't know if Steve and Dennis want to move.
It's gorgeous. There's only one problem, sort of. I'm really into sailing. And I like snowboarding, so...
Well, you're making great whiskey in Washington, so I think it's working out for you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, we've thought about it many times. I wouldn't mind getting back into distilling. In fact, I love doing distillation. I like blending even more. I think it's more exciting personally. But I'd love to get back into distilling. And if I were, what is my dream distillery? You all know this one. You've all probably heard of Willet. They've got an optimum size distillery that's like perfect for producing a nice national quality. I'm just talking what they, just their brand name, for example.
Well, speaking of Willet, sorry, I'm just going to tease something here for those that are listening. We are working with Willet on buying some barrels, not for a full month feature, but for some, bottles exclusively available for purchase to our members. The conversations are very much in the beginnings, so just throwing that out there. But anyways,
I'd love to try it. I don't know. I think they're one of the first distilleries I ever visited in Kentucky, and I just felt, who hasn't fallen in love with Willet to some degree for different reasons? And I just thought they had a really good setup, size-wise, location. You name it. I think I'd maybe distill things a little differently, but that's just because I have more of a background in brandy distillation.
All right, so Jesse knows more than Willet. Let's move on.
Write that down.
Oh gosh. The problem with being recorded, right? There's people ask questions from previous interviews.
All right. So Tim Moore asks, what is your favorite finishing option you've done, and what haven't you used that you are most looking forward to finishing with in the future? Which I think we answered was the Calvados apple brandy barrels, but
it sounds fun. That's not the one I'm most looking forward to.
Okay.
I really love to. Well, there's a lot. I don't know. You name it. There's 1,000 of them I'd like to do. We're slowly getting through them. For those of you who aren't very familiar with Doc Swinson's, that is our main thing, is finishing whiskeys. And last year alone, I think I did 12 different unique finishes. I loved them all for different reasons. That's the point, right? There's something for somebody, or something for everybody. And I'm really looking forward to focusing on some products that are less known here in the United States. So like Sauterne and Pinot de Charente. I really like those flavor profiles. I have not done a Sauterne. I have done 2 Pinot de Charentes, but I'm really excited to work with even more of them.
I'm not familiar with the second one. I know Sauterne, but what's the second one you said?
Exactly. So that's the cool thing about Pinot de Charente. So Pinot de Charente is very similar to Pommeau, if any of you are familiar with that, which is apple brandy mixed with apple juice then aged. It's a little more commonly found than a Pinot de Charente. At least Dennis could probably correct me on that, but I found that to be more the case, because you don't see Pinot de Charente like anywhere, but I definitely see some Pommeaus.
I just selected some barrels that were finished in German ice wine barrels, which was super interesting.
That would be really fun too. Ice wines. I tend to love working with fortified wines or other spirits the most. They just have a lot to offer the whiskeys, especially the MGPs, which could be pretty intense. So they do really well with them. But to answer your question, Pinot de Charente is the equivalent to a Pommeau, which it's cognac. It's typically aged, but not always necessarily. That's been blended with grape must, so the juice of the grape, usually before it's fermented, but sometimes after it's been partially fermented as well. And then it's aged for like a Pinot Blanc, so white. Minimum age is 18 months, and it has to stay in the distillery for a certain amount of months, or the warehouse for a certain amount of months entirely. And they also do rosé and then Pinot Rouge as well, which are aged typically less. But for the most part, they're aged sometimes upwards of 15 or 20 years even in typically French oak. So they're really nice. They're sweet. They're like dessert. What's that?
They're so good.
They're just really tasty, and it's like taking you right into the vineyard. You know, it's like popping the grapes right off the vine yourself and eating them. It's just like, I don't know. It's kind of like mythical and magical, to be totally honest with you. Not to be really cheesy about it, but there's something just gorgeous about them, and you still get that really nice, like aromatic qualities of the cognac that was typically used, or typically used in it. And I have a soft spot for eau de vies as well. So younger cognacs. I mean, I love old ones, but younger, well, not cognacs, but brandies, just because they're like truly pure of the essence of the fruit, which is really interesting. So highly recommend if you could find a Pinot de Charente, pick one up.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
You might like it. I mean, it's totally in the dessert wine category for the most part. It's usually a little cleaner tasting compared to a dessert wine, just because they go through the distillation process, and it's mostly just juice and alcohol. It's about 18% or so. I highly recommend it. Give it a try. If you like a good tawny port or something like that, it's a totally different category, but nonetheless, it's going to be sweet. Or picture him in a sherry, something like that. It's going to be sweet.
This question is for Steve. It says, can you please tell us what color your ceilings are?
Dirty.
Steve, are you there? Can you tell us what color we're looking at there?
Oh, that's Ned.
That's not Steve.
That's not Steve. We lost Steve. I think Steve's in the background there. Or outside. Maybe they're barbecuing.
All right, we got a few more questions here. We might go over time here, guys.
There he is.
Sorry, guys. I'm packing for a red eye that I got to leave for in like 20
No,
minutes.
you're good. I'm just giving you a hard time. We were wondering what your ceilings were.
I don't have feelings anymore. Is that what was the question?
This isn't therapy, Steve.
I said ceilings, but please, we don't have time to talk about your feelings, Steve. I think there's therapy in Washington you can go to.
Yes, my ceiling. Yes, it's very pretty, isn't it? Thank you for noticing that.
All right, Genevieve Wood. This question is for Dennis. Having a background in bars, what's the biggest downfall whiskey bars and restaurants do that cause them to fail or become unpopular?
Ooh, that's a deep question.
A loaded question, huh?
$1 question, yeah.
That's an excellent question. Ultimately, I think for me as someone who's run restaurants and bars, not just whiskey, but it's paying attention to market trends and what people like. Ultimately, I mean, the idea of a restaurant is to provide hospitality to people. So for me as an operator, if I say, well, hey, I like whiskey X and I'm only going to serve whiskey X, nobody wants to drink whiskey X, but I like it, so I'm going to make everyone just drink whiskey X, I'm probably not going to do very well. So a lot of it is just kind of paying attention to market trends and what people like, finding new things, because part of the reason we all go out to bars and restaurants is to discover something new. And that's exciting, right? When you get to sit down in front of the bartender and be like, hey, what do you have that's new? What are you excited about? So staff education is key. You want your bartenders to know what they're serving. If you go into a bar and the bartenders don't even know what products they have in the back bar, you're like, hey, I would like a Doc Swinson's whiskey that you see in the back shelf, and the bartender's like, I've never heard of that. And you're like, it's right behind you. That could be an element, which doesn't happen very often. But it could happen. So I think just, staying with market trends, providing things that are new and exciting that both the staff and customers are excited about, and having those interactions, because it's all about those interactions and the shared love of spirit that makes it really exciting to go out. If I'm just going to drink whiskey, I can drink at home. but I like to go out because I like to have interaction with other human beings. And I like to hear from others what they're excited about and what they want to expose me to. And if they give me a pour and I don't like it, that's fine. But I've exposed myself to something that's new, and I might like it. It might be my next favorite thing. So I think that's great.
I think if I were to add to that, I think that's beautifully said. I think one thing I were to add to that, just as an operator of bars and restaurants, is to hire people that are passionate about what you sell. Like, if the people behind your bar or serving your tables aren't passionate about what you're doing, then they're not going to, the message isn't going to be conveyed to your guests. So finding the people that genuinely want to sell the products that you carry and are interested in learning more, and that leads to a better experience. And that's what I preach to our managers all the time. Is I think the biggest thing is hiring the right people. So
yeah,
upselling.
Absolutely. And like to add on to that, like I think too, like something that is really important is you don't have to necessarily like everything to be excited about it. I worked so one of the restaurants that I opened in 2014 was an oyster restaurant. I actually hate eating oysters. I do not eat oysters.
Blasphemy.
I love shucking oysters. I love selling oysters. I love it when people enjoy oysters. I just don't particularly like oysters, but I take the time to taste every oyster and learn the different characteristics of the oysters, because, it's something that a lot of people, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, really, really, really love. And so it brings me happiness it brought me happiness selling people oysters. But it didn't necessarily have to be my favorite thing. And I think that like harkens to what Tyler's saying, is like having people that are excited about selling something to people that they really want to enjoy, and taking the time to learn it, even if it's not your own personal preference. And I think that's the key, is being able to enjoy and recommend things, even if they're not your own personal preference. Because just like tasting whiskey, I might like a whiskey that's like super caramel toffee. I might hate the flavor of cherry, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone hates the flavor of cherry. Some people really love the flavor of cherry. And so when they come into the bar and sit in front of me, if I can't give them a whiskey that they like, they're probably not going to come back. So for me, as someone who likes whiskey, being able to understand what those flavor profiles are, even though they're not necessarily my favorite, being able to recommend something that will be someone's favorite, that's going to make that successful.
Awesome. I don't know if this makes me basic, but Kumamotos are my favorite oyster. Just
yeah,
Kumamotos and Shigokus are some of the better ones. Yes,
right there with you, Trevor.
I love Kumamotos. Sorry, oyster talk. Matthew Archer asks, are there any disagreements between the tasters when choosing expressions or proofs? Any fun stories on how those disagreements are resolved and who typically wins? Well, Jesse, I'd imagine, wins, but
I have a very supportive team.
We've never disagreed once.
Well, it sounds like there's a little bit more to that. So
that's. Honestly, I mean, if I can answer this question,
Dennis, I was hoping you or Steve would maybe chime in this before I just go off and be like, well, this is what's kind of happening.
I think the cool thing about working with Doc Swinson's is that ultimately at the end of the day, I think Jesse has the final say, because he is the blender. He's the one who puts the stamp of approval on.
Does he have a mallet and he like slams it down if there's an argument?
I will get him one, because now he needs one.
We need a new wood one for the barrels anyways.
Yeah, too. But I think the great thing is that we are all involved in the tasting process, and we do, like Jesse says, we will taste all these products at different proof points. And while it is ultimately Jesse's decision, I think it is a very collaborative atmosphere where we are all free to say, hey, this is the one I like this proof point better than this proof point. And we can bounce those ideas back and forth amongst each other and kind of really decide what's going to hit the most, the most palates. We don't want something that's just going to hit one individual's preferred palate. We want something that's going to appeal to the most people, unless it's something that we really just want to hit one person's palate, because there are those products that exist. Yeah. But I think the great thing is that we do have this kind of like mutual understanding, is that when we're providing feedback, we can provide that honest feedback, and then Jesse's going to actually take that feedback, and then he's going to make the decision that is the best decision.
Dennis, awesome. I don't think I could have said that any better. So thank you. That was perfect and eloquent.
Yeah, well, we're past our hour mark, so I want to get through these questions. We have a few more, so let's do like a rapid fire answer, like a few words or less, just to answer the questions.
Okay.
Dennis, I think you froze, but all right, let's go through here. Brendan Franco, do you match specific finishing barrels based on the profiles from the base whiskey?
To better elaborate on that, you mean do I take a finishing barrel and pair it with the mash bill? I think it'll work best, for example. Yes.
Great. All right.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to clarify, I mean, sort of, but the reality is, if I don't know the barrel, I'm going to elaborate here for a second. If I don't know that this particular finish cask well enough, let's just say it's kind of new for me, I'll put different mash bills in those casks and create ultimately what I think is the best blend. And that's how I blend almost most of my whiskeys. The goal is always to make the best that I can for the inputs that I have, right? It's not, especially when it comes to exploratory casks, the goal isn't necessarily consistency. That's where the core line exists. The core line is more consistent. So you can guarantee that bottle's, going to be roughly like it was last time. Exploratory cask, the goal is always to make the best tasting thing that I can. And more often than not, a blend of all these different mash bills is better. That's the beauty of blending.
All right. Genevieve Wood says, Jesse, has there ever been discussion of Doc Swinson's doing an infinity barrel?
We have a Solera system.
That's the same thing, right? Or pretty much.
It consists of 154 barrels that's infinitely being pulled slightly from the bottom and then refilled on the very top. And it has to trickle through every single one of those barrels before it gets to the bottom in order to make it again. So if you haven't tried Solera method, even for those of you who are adverse to rye, I highly recommend it. I don't think I have a bottle next to me, but Solera method rye whiskey finished in rum cask is essentially an infinity barrel.
All right. Well, you're going to send me some of those, just FYI. Sarah Steepleton asks, how do you compare West Coast whiskey to Southern bourbon? Is there a West Coast style?
You're looking at it.
Hey.
You take Midwest bourbon and then change it on the West Coast. You mean just in general, not like related to us? Because, I mean, we definitely have a Midwest stereotypical bourbon characteristic, because that was the point. Because that's why we use MGP. What's that?
What is the Midwest stereotypical?
It tastes like bourbon.
Touche, sir.
I mean, no, I'm not trying to be honest with you, but it's synonymous with bourbon. Like, I mean, there's some really great whiskeys being distilled on the West Coast, some really great bourbons, but, and this is just my opinion, of course, they don't exactly taste like bourbon. They taste something a little bit different, and that's probably because of the type of climate we're in, or everywhere on the West Coast. I mean, there's a huge variance there. I mean, it's massive. And then more often than not, they're young, or it's a craft distillery that's processing bourbon through pot stills, which is totally a different ball game than using the column still. You're going to get completely different, or not completely, a fairly widespread in flavor difference there. So I think ultimately Midwest bourbon, what you're used to is more quintessentially bourbon. At least that's how I think of it. Whereas what we find here on the West Coast, as being originally a West Coast distiller as well, it just has quite a different profile. So anyways, that's, I guess, the best way to answer that.
But before the next question, I apologize. I got to jump. I got to get on the road. But thank you, Trevor, for putting this all together. Thank you to everyone else.
Honestly, Steve was the first person I talked to at Doc Swinson's and was a big part of putting this all together. So, Steve, thank you so much. Look forward to working with you in the future and doing more fun stuff.
Absolutely. You guys are in good hands. Good luck with the rest of it, and enjoy a bottle of Doc's on me. Cheers.
Later. All right, we got 2 more questions, guys. Courtney Knitter asked, what has been the biggest challenge with limitations in sourcing usable cooperage to maintain the flavor profile that lives up to Doc Swinson's style?
That's a great question, Courtney. Working with big distilleries, more often than not, you don't get the opportunity to specify what type of cooperage it always goes into unless you're making it from new make. Now, most of our barrels are not new make, and we haven't even touched on those yet. So it's actually a myriad of different cooperages that we work with. And the best part is they all add a little bit of different characteristic to them, which once again is just like having a spice cabinet. So you get to play with these different spices in order to make the profile of your food, your dinner, your whiskey. So using these different cooperages, I think, is really actually quite beneficial, at least from the blender's perspective.
Awesome. Last question, and then we'll go and choose some winners here. Andrew Valdez asked, did you guys keep any of the first blend you did to keep and look back at how different it is today?
Absolutely. So there's what's called the library here at Doc Swinson's, and it is a room completely full of bottles reaching all the way back to the very first Doc Swinson's ever bottled back in 2017. And I do go back and visit them. In fact, all of us do from time to time. So it shows how we've progressed, how my blending techniques have improved. Hopefully it's always that case. And we do get to visit our history, and it's really exciting. So we keep, several bottles every single batch that is released through Doc Swinson so that we could revisit them. Absolutely. It's important.
All right, let's roll through these, and then each of you are going to choose your favorite question. So we have Clark White that asked the question about, moving from Washington, where you'd open your dream distillery. We have Tim Moore, who asked what finish you're most looking forward to. Genevieve asked the question about the biggest failures of whiskey bars. Matt Archer asked about the disagreements when tasting expressions or proofs and any fun stories and who typically wins. Brendan asked, do you match specific finishing barrels based on the profile of the whiskey? Sorry, scrolling through these. We have the question about the infinity barrel. Sorry. We have a question about West Coast whiskey versus Southern whiskey. Question about biggest challenges of sourcing cooperage and finding the flavor profile that Doc Swinson's live up to, and then keeping the first blend that you guys did in the library. So favorite questions of the night. Dennis, you go first.
Oh,
I'm looking through them again.
Sorry, I know I didn't. We have all these questions in our private chat. I know I didn't get to all of them, but try to.
I would say the finishing cast question, because I think that's it's what exemplifies Doc Swinson's the most. So I like that question.
I mean, call me a cop out, but I don't disagree. I think, and I could have elaborated on that for hours for the record.
Choose a different one.
I have to choose a different one.
Yes, there's 2 winners. So we have. Tim Moore was the one that asked a question about what's the favorite finishing option and what you look forward to. So
that one's a cool one. Let's go with that. I don't disagree.
Well, that's what Dennis chose.
No, didn't he choose the one that we paired the mash bill with the? Did I just hear that wrong?
You heard that wrong, but that's a good one too. I like
pair
that
the
one
mash
too.
bill with the
That's
finishing cast.
2.
Sorry, I thought that's the one that you said.
Okay, so Dennis is choosing what's your favorite finish of the barrels, and you're choosing, do you taste the whiskey and then determine what finish is the best for it, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, got it. All right. So 2 finishing questions.
2 finishing questions.
That's what Doc.
That's what we are.
Secret note: finishing questions.
Oh wow, you're making my job hard here. So we have Clark White who asked the question about. I'm sorry, that's not Clark. My apologies, Clark. Tim Moore asked the question about what you're looking most forward to, and the question about that was Brendan Franco. Do you match specific? Making my job tough here. I'm going to go with first prize to Brendan Franco about drinking the whiskey and then figuring out what it goes to, because I think that's the more nuanced kind of like whiskey nerd kind of question. And then second place is going to go to Tim Moore, who asked the question about what you're most looking forward to as far as finishing. So Tim and Brendan will get those prizes out to you. Thank you to Dennis, Jesse, and Steve who jumped off for providing these prizes and staying on with us a little longer than we expected here. But gentlemen, it was very nice talking to you and talking about all things Doc Swinson's. I hope everyone enjoys their barrel this month. And thank you for being a Whiskey Club member. We always appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
guys.
We appreciate it.